It's time for another new AMD processor review. I swear AMD's now binning CPUs faster than Intel can sell them. This time, we have the Ryzen 5 7500X3D. So this is a new binned 3D V-cache model of a binned 3D V-cache model. So that model would be the 7600X3D, which we're actually yet to look at. And, well, that's a binned version of the 7800X3D. The 7800X3D is, of course, the CPU that many of you already know and love, released back in mid-2023. It's an 8-core Zen 4 processor, packing a massive 128 megabyte L3 cache. Then last year, we got the 7600X3D. Well, sort of. This one was an exclusive to certain retailers such as Micro Center in the US as an in-store only item, or at Mind Factory over in Germany. That said, I was able to purchase one over on AliExpress, so I'll be able to test that soon. Before that though, I have been able to acquire the 7500X3D, as it's available here locally in Australia as a retail CPU, which is a bit odd, as it is meant to be an OEM only part, meaning you shouldn't just be able to purchase it like I have. Instead, you'd have to buy something like a pre-built system. But yeah, I was able to buy a retail box version. Go figure. Anyway, it cost me 430 Australian dollars, around 33% less than that of the 7800X3D, which currently costs 640 Australian dollars. And that also makes the 7500X3D about $100 Australian more than the 7600X, so it's going to be interesting to see how those two compare. But before we get to that, today's video is brought to you by Insta360 and their Link to 4K webcam, now available in white. Building on the original Link, the Link 2 includes AI tracking for individuals and groups, auto framing, and auto gesture controls. For a webcam, it has fantastic autofocus with no focus pulsing, which is a major plus. It also now offers modes such as customizable backgrounds, adding versatility to every use case. The Link 2 is equipped with a gimbal, making it perfect for presentations, meetings, group calls, and any situation where you might be moving around. The 4K 30fps sensor offers excellent performance even in low light situations, and you can really only get better performance out of something like a digital SLR camera. With various AI features and a user-friendly desktop app, achieving the perfect presentation's a breeze. It also pairs perfectly with the new Wave speakerphone, so for more information, please click the links in the video description. Okay, so before we jump into the blue bar graphs, just a few quick details regarding the 7500X3D specifications. Like the 7600X3D, it packs 6 cores with 12 threads, but this time the cores boost to a maximum frequency of 4.5 GHz, 200 MHz lower than that of the 7600X3D, and then 500 MHz lower than the 7800X3D. Also, when compared to the 7600X, we're looking at a massive 800 MHz frequency reduction, so that 96 MB L3 cache is going to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting. For testing, we are using our standard AM5 test system featuring 32 GB of DDR5 6000 CL30 memory and the GeForce RTX 5090. I'm not going to explain why we test this way for this video, but if you are curious, we have plenty of content on the channel that explains CPU testing and why this method makes the most sense. Okay, let's just get into the results. Actually, before we jump straight into the blue bar graphs, here's a look at how the 7500X3D behaves during a heavy all-core workload using Cinebench. Stock, it maintained an average core clock frequency of 4.43 GHz with a peak single-core frequency of 4.55 GHz. And when using a 360mm all-in-one liquid cooler, we saw a peak CPU temperature of 76 degrees, which is pretty typical of these AMD Ryzen 5 processors, at least those that use solder rather than thermal paste. As for performance in Cinebench, as you might have expected, a lowly clocked 6-core 12-thread Zen 4 processor, it's not exactly a beast when it comes to productivity performance, scoring just 792 points, making it the slowest modern processor that we've checked out. The single-core performance is also very weak. It does beat the 5800X3D, though be aware the 3D V-cache is of no benefit in Cinebench. The 3D V-cache also doesn't really help when it comes to shader compilation performance, and as a result the 7500X3D takes 14 to 16% longer to compile shaders when compared to the already quite slow 7600X. Of course, most games will allow you to play while the shaders are compiling, but this often results in stuttery frame rates. Okay, so moving into the gaming benchmarks, and we'll start with Rainbow Six Siege using the medium preset. Here the 7500X 3D managed to match the 9600X, making it 17% faster than the 7600X and 24% faster than the 14600K, so a good result for a more budget-focused processor. Using the Ultra Plus preset, it again matched the 9600X, though under these more GPU-limited conditions, it was just 13% faster than the 7600X, and then just 5% slower than the 7800X 3D. The 7500X 3D was quite a bit slower than the 7800X 3D and Marvel Rivals when using the medium settings, trailing by an 18% margin, coming in just 5% faster than the 9600X and 10% faster than the 7600X. Then when using the more GPU-limited Ultra preset, it roughly matched the performance of the 14600K, making it just 8% faster than the 7600X, but also just 8% slower than the 7800X 3D. Assassin's Creed Shadows is a heavily GPU-limited game when using a modern processor, and as a result, the 7500X 3D was able to match the 7800X 3D using both the medium and ultra-high settings. Still, that did make it around 10% faster than the 7600X. Moving on to Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered using the medium settings, the 7500X 3D was 13% slower than the 7800X 3D, but also 13 to 15% faster than the 9600X, 14600K and 7600X. Then when switching to the very high preset, we see that the 7500X 3D competes more closely with the 14600K, making it 16% faster than the 7600X, and then 17% slower than the 7800X 3D. Next up, we have Cyberpunk 2077, and here the 7500X 3D is 12% faster than the 7600X when using the medium settings, and then 9% faster using the Ray Tracing Ultra preset. So fairly mild gains, but also impressive given that the 7500X 3D is clocked 800 MHz lower. And it was also just 12% slower than the 7800X 3D when using the medium settings, and then just 5% with ray tracing enabled. The 7500X 3D performed very well in Counter-Strike 2, delivering around 20% greater performance when compared to the 7600X, and even moved ahead of the Zen 5-based 9600X, which performs very well in this title. The CPU-heavy Space Marine 2 doesn't benefit massively from the 3D V-cache of the 7500X 3D, though it is still of benefit, just not as much as you might expect for such a CPU-limited title. It's the massive clock speed deficit that really hurts the 7500X 3D here, which is why it's only 15 to 16% faster than the 7600X, whereas the 7800X 3D is much faster than the 7700X, for example, though the 7700X isn't included here, but we have tested it in the past. The 3D V-cache did enable the 7500X 3D to beat the 14600K, despite it still being 16% slower than the 7800X 3D. Testing with The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered shows that the 3D V-cache really helps to improve 1% low performance. For example, the 7500X 3D was just 6% faster than the 7600X when comparing the average frame rate, but a massive 25% faster when looking at 1% lows. The 9600X, 14600K and 225F all throughput just shy of 190 FPS in Spider-Man 2 when using the medium preset, and this meant that the 7500X 3D was 16% faster, allowing for 215 FPS, and that also made it just 6% slower than the 7800X 3D. All of that said though, when using the ultimate ray tracing preset, the 7500X 3D is limited to the same level of performance seen from the 7600X and 9600X. The inclusion of the 3D V-cache only manages to offset the reduction in core clock frequency for the 7500X 3D in Mafia The Old Country, as here it was only able to match the 9600X and 7600X, though we are looking at considerably better 1% low performance when using the Epic preset. ACC loves 3D V-cache and doesn't require a huge amount of CPU processing power, so unsurprisingly, the 7500X 3D crushes it, allowing for 260 FPS using the medium preset, making it 21% faster than the 9600X and 31% faster than the 7600X. It was also just 11% slower than the 7800X 3D, and we saw similar scaling using the Epic preset. Finally, we have Baldur's Gate 3, and this is another game that works really well with AMD's 3D V-Cache technology, and as a result, the lowly clocked 6-core 7500X 3D does very well, boosting performance from the 7600X by 34% to 172 FPS, making it around 20% faster than the 14600K and 9600X. Now, here we have the 12-game average data calculated using the geomean, and here we see that when using the medium settings, the 7500X 3D was on average just 11% slower than the 7800X 3D, which is impressive given it's clocked 10% lower with 25% fewer cores, and that strongly suggests that it's the reduced clock frequency that's the primary reason for this reduction in performance. It was also 10% faster than the 9600X and 16% faster than the 14600K and 7600X. Then when using the Ultra settings, it was on average just 7% slower than the 7800X 3D, but also just 13% faster than the 7600X. Okay, so in terms of value, the 7500X 3D, it's not amazing at the current asking price here in Australia. I paid $430, which is still the current asking price. And while that does make it considerably better value than the 7800X 3D, reducing the cost per frame by 25%, it's also far worse value than our best value option, the 7500F, costing nearly 70% more per frame. If we ignore the 7500F though, which has to be purchased via AliExpress, but there's really no issue doing so, and that $210 Australian price includes delivery to your door. If we ignore it anyway, the 7500X 3D is only 10% more expensive per frame when compared to the 7600X, so not a bad premium for that extra performance. Even so though, I think the 7500X 3D does need to drop down to under 400 Australian dollars for it to be an exciting option for lower end builds. After all, in the gaming benchmarks featured in this video, we're looking almost exclusively at CPU limited data, and even then, the 7500X 3D was on average just 21% faster than the 7500F, while costing a little over twice as much. Finally, out of interest, I also overclocked my retail 7500X 3D processor, setting a positive 200 MHz boost with a negative voltage offset of -15, going to -20 for example would cause the system to crash. This boosted the all-core frequency to 4725 MHz in the Cinebench multi-core workload, a 7% increase in frequency with no change to power consumption. This 7% increase in frequency boosted the Cinebench score by a predictable 6%, so not exactly exciting stuff, but it did get the 7500X 3D pretty close to the multi-core performance of the 5800X 3D. The single-core gains though were even weaker, just a 4% uplift there. The good news is though, that this extra performance doesn't come at the cost of increased power usage thanks to the -15 voltage offset, so we're looking at just 66 watts for 842 points in Cinebench. Oddly though, some of the games that we tested did respond very well to this overclock, as the 7500X 3D appeared to boost better during these workloads, improving performance in Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered, for example, by as much as 11%. That said, the gains in most of the games were more typically around 6 to 7%, as seen here in Marvel Rivals, so again, not really anything to get too excited about, and it's probably not worth risking stability for. So then, the 7500X 3D. It's not amazing at the current price, but it's also a nice option to have, I guess, and if pricing does improve, it could end up being a steal for those of you jumping on the AM5 platform, though I'm not really sure how many of you would be doing that right now, given the state of DDR5 pricing. It's certainly not something you'd be upgrading or side grading to from an existing AM5 processor, so it really is only an option for those of you upgrading to the AM5 platform. So perhaps by the time DDR5 pricing finally recovers, AMD will be pushing out all the 7500X 3D stock at a heavy discount, much like what they've been doing with the 7500F. We can only hope, right? And there's also the 7600X 3D. I know some of you will be asking why I haven't reviewed that. Are we going to review it? Well, we will review it, but the reason why we haven't reviewed it is because you can't actually purchase it in Australia. So for now, you're just going to have to check pricing and availability of all of these models in your region to decide which one is best for you. But as I said, I have managed to purchase a 7600X 3D now, and I'll get a review out as soon as I can. But for now, that is going to do it for this video. If you liked it, you know what to do. Subscribe for more content because, as I said, I have purchased a 7600X3D now successfully overseas. It is coming my way and I'll be able to test that out, but it'll just be a slightly faster version of this CPU. And that information will be useful for those of you that can actually get a 7600X3D. But again, a lot of you have been requesting it, so I've done my best to get one. We also have the join button on Patreon. If you want to become a Harbour Unboxed member, you can sign up to either one of those things. It'll give you access to our exclusive Discord server, monthly live streams, Q&A stuff, and behind the scenes content. So check that out if you're interested, but if not, that's perfectly fine. And I would like to thank you for watching this video. I'm your host, Steve. See you again next time.